Hello, my name is Brendan.
And my name is Nick. Today we'll be doing a standalone thought piece on live action adaptations as a whole in the industry at this moment. As you know, Disney has a very packed schedule coming up from April through, I believe, July for live action adaptations, as well as for both Disney, for Pixar, for Marvel. A lot of the branches have these movies coming out, and we wanted to take a moment and ask ourselves some questions about live action adaptations and if we could ever like any of these adaptations. So I've got a series of questions, and we'll both answer the question by ourselves without any interference from the other side, just to get two perspectives on this. So, the first question we've come up with is talking about the live action adaptation trend as a whole. Could this go off a cliff and be a problem?
And so I'll go ahead and answer first then. Could it be a problem? It sounds like a fun idea if done right. But if you're going to cherry pick all kinds of franchises and films that were originally successful and just try and capitalize on that success to make money, then no, that's a problem within itself. That's my take anyway. What do you think? Could it be a problem?
My belief as far as the live action adaptation trend is that it's a problem for two reasons. The first is that it endorses this problem of clinging to nostalgia for the past way too hard, to the point that we stop thinking of new ideas or new interesting ideas and cling to just what we know and what we believe. And I believe that's a real problem, especially if you are discouraging new creation or sniping new creators, new writers, new directors, by just having them make the same thing we've made a few times before. Additionally, I believe that furthers this narrative that animation is for kids and live action is for adults. And it results in this degradation of the reputation of animation over the years, to the point that it makes it seem like the real version of the movie is a live action movie, while the kids' version is the animated version, which there have been many animations over the years which prove that through animation you can tell interesting and unique stories that can't be told through live action or through live action imitations. And I think the biggest problem is that it hurts the reputation of animation.
I agree. It does hurt the reputation of not only the animation but the studio itself. Keep that in mind, Disney, if you're watching.
Alright, next question we've got is talking about Dumbo specifically. We've talked about this movie on the American Recut, but I'd like to ask instead, what does this movie imply for future Disney adaptations through its execution?
Based on what we saw through the execution of Dumbo itself, and as well as some earlier Disney adaptations as well, it shows a growing problem, because Disney is clearly drunk on this nostalgia binge. Because as we mentioned, it's a good idea in practice, but if done improperly, if you just keep cherry picking specific franchises to appeal to audiences of a wide spectrum, then you're just gonna shoot yourself in the foot in the end.
Alright, my own take on Dumbo is that it confirmed a lot of my deepest fears as far as live action trend would go. We had a script that became muddied and lost without animation to lean on. We had characters who were once major protagonists be relegated to side positions because you could not make the logistics of having a non-talking character who has to live in the real world work as a character alongside actual human beings. And it resulted in a script that went from being something that was somewhat unique and had a unique perspective on showing kind of horrors of circus life and these horrors of the situations done through the medium of animation, instead watered down, becoming a kind of corporatist or like a big evil corporation plot, along with the characters who were formerly main characters but couldn't be because of the limitations of CGI as a storytelling method, not technologically. These characters became side characters because you can't tell a convincing story with these kinds of animal characters, and it makes me worried about the future of movies that use animal characters, like Aladdin or Lion King, which are the movies that are coming up.
Right. No, and we're already seeing symptoms of the Aladdin movie. Will Aladdin suffer from meddling with the original script? Most definitely. Because, you had all these original animated characters. Abu, the monkey. Genie, as we all know, as played by Robbie Williams, who is so animated, and then is replaced by Will Smith, there's just going to be so much lost from the original source material that it's hardly going to be a homage at all.
My own take on Aladdin is that with the way that the shift over from animation to CGI will work is that animal characters will be downplayed heavily. This includes characters like Iago, Abu, the carpet, arguably. The genie will have less expression unless they're really willing to throw a lot of money at this, which will cheapen the rest of the movie as a result if they have to throw the budget at the genie scenes. And Iago, especially, who was once the counterpoint to Jafar in these movies, but is going to have to be relegated to a pet position or just a taskmaster position, while Jafar is forced to play off of different characters. Now, what this is going to mean is that we're going to lose a lot of the scenes that between just Jafar and Iago, where they explain what they're doing to each other. And instead, we'll have to have more scenes of Jafar and the Sultan, or Jafar and Aladdin, or Jafar and the Princess, which means that we're going to have to cultivate new ways to force them to scenes with each other, which is going to throw off a lot of the pacing of the movie as a result of that. And I think that Aladdin is going to suffer a bit from the changes to the script, but I think that the major moments of it, a lot of scenes with the genie and Aladdin, a lot of the scenes where you have Jafar monologuing to someone, they'll be intact enough, but it's going to be felt for the impact on the script.
Now, Aladdin will have some human characters. Let's go on and talk about Lion King, who will not have any human characters performing in this movie. Will transitioning from animation to CGI exclusively hurt the story?
For Lion King, I believe that what's going to happen is we're going to have problems with Uncanny Valley, because since we don't have a lot of the things to lean on for animation anymore, things like Disney eyes, the ways that characters can move in impossible ways, the ways that you can smooth out movement through stretch and shrink, or whatever that's called. I'm bad with industry terms. But anyways, the things that you lose from transitioning to CGI from animation are going to hurt a lot of the moments of this movie. Unlike with Aladdin or even Dumbo, where you can get around it because there's other characters to play off of who look human. With this one, since there's no human characters, you have to deal with the problems of lions talking in a way that would actually be biologically correct for lions. You have to deal with meerkats and warthogs that look like meerkats and warthogs, which aren't appealing at all. And you have to deal with all these problems of the movie, and you're giving yourself a hurdle to get over from the starting gate, when realistically, this probably shouldn't be adapted to 3D. This should just be a touched up 2D animation, possibly a 2D animation with a 3D plane added, something like that.
I agree. There's a lot of constraints with CGI versus a 2D animation, because, I mean, with 2D animation, you can see a lot more charisma, expression, and character through 2D animation, whereas CGI, like you said, you're going to have a CGI lion, but what facial expressions can you give it without it seeming too over the top or just completely absurd that it just spoils the movie for everyone involved?
Right, that's a pretty good answer. Now, Brendan, I'm going to ask a question that this is just based on your emotional state. It doesn't have to be like factual or like a deep dive into the history of it, but where do you think this trend of live action remakes got its start?
I want to say comics, personally, because what was the first, if not foremost, live action adaptation? Batman. Batman itself was a 2D comic. It was something that we'd never seen before. But to have translated that into real life was incredibly difficult, starting from Adam West to what we have now. And, some live adaptations have worked, but they've had a lot of material to work with.
If you don't mind my questioning your answer for a moment here,
sure.
Wouldn't it be better to start with Superman?
Superman, too. That's a good point. Superman is also kind of an archetype superhero who was translated into live action, but did that work well? No, it was
a huge success. It was a huge success. Those movies did amazingly. They made like 6 of them before they got rebooted.
Well, then in that case, we could talk about it being a product of its time, and yeah, it worked. But when we look back on it now I'm just being too elitist.
Well, my own answer for this is that it would date back to, I want to say, the early 90s for Disney under Eisner, where they began really trying to do these adaptations in live action for the Disney properties. And it began with the old George of the Jungle and the 101 Dalmatians adaptations.
Oh, that's
where,
right.
Where they didn't really know where to go with new properties. Pixar was beating them in the box office, DreamWorks was beating them in the box office, so they tried doing these live action silly adaptations of their works. And they got some limited success with that, but not enough to stick with it the first time, which we've seen a couple of resurgences of them attempting to do this again and again with live actions. And it seems like this time with the heavy CGI usage, it seems to have finally stuck.
That's a good point. I completely forgot about 101 Dalmatians, and that did seem to work because it didn't rely heavily on CGI, but instead it relied on characters and story.
All right, now, you did bring up comic book adaptations, so I would like to talk about a recent Disney acquisition, Marvel. Now, as far as adapting their comics, is something lost or is something gained by adapting these comic books to a broader audience?
I think it's a gain, because you do expose people who have never been into comics to these superheroes, and it can inspire a whole generation of new comic book writers and comic book enthusiasts, which is it's a very good trend to get into, I think.
I would say it's also a net gain, but for different reasons. I believe one of the problems that these comic books, especially very long-running comic books, have is a problem of being a sign of their age that they came from. You have a lot of problems, properties like Wonder Woman was really bad when it came out. You have all these characters where they were kind of underthought, or they were just kind of churned out at this really fast rate for comic books to kind of make more issues to sell to nerds, basically. If they cast a wide enough net, you'll get someone. But with the recent reimaginings of them and live action adaptations, we managed to get rid of the comic book issues where things kind of have these really dumb plots or these villain of the week plots that don't resonate at all and are just there for nerds. But we also get a chance to take another look at our comic book heroes and really think about them with years of thought behind them now. It gives us a good chance to look back at our comic book characters and really cut away some of the fat that is the comic book genre and reimagine these characters in interesting ways, which I think that lately Marvel has been doing less and less cutting and more just pumping in the comic book pulp, which doesn't help their characters because they come across as really dumb, especially as we get to the filler characters that need movies made for them. But yeah, that's my own take on comic book movies. I think it's overall a net gain because we get to reimagine these characters, but we're slowly losing that.
Now, my question to you. What is your perfect live-action adaptation? If you were to pick any franchise to remake, what would it be?
For a franchise to make live action from animation, I would pick, if we're going in the Disney wheelhouse, something like Atlantis or Treasure Planet, movies where they were severely limited by the limitations of the funding they were given as movies and were limited by the extent of the kind of false 3D type they had to use at the time. I think that these movies where they don't have a lot of animal characters, we don't have a lot of characters where we have run into problems with, oh, well, he can't talk anymore, or he doesn't look like he can talk anymore, and that's going to be a problem with the CGI. The movies where we have human characters, primarily, and we have characters where they have some kind of distorted sense to them that can be recaptured with CGI to some extent. So I think that my ideal movies, as far as live-action adaptations, are movies that don't feature talking animals because you can't recapture that well in CGI. It never looks good. These are going to be movies where you have primarily human characters doing more mundane tasks for them, and these are movies where you can still have a few spectacles to take advantage of the CGI. Like, not like a non-stop action ride of a movie, but smaller things. Like, I can imagine the dynamite scene from Atlantis where they just blow the bridge apart being hilarious in live action. I would love to see that scene. Well, it took me, 5-10 seconds?
Yeah.
But yeah, these are the kinds of movies that I would be looking for live actions if I was going to adapt them. I would not be going for movies that are heavy on animals. These are things like Lion King that's coming out, Little Mermaid, The Swan Princess would be a terrible choice.
Oh God, yeah.
So on. These are movies where I would say let's maybe look at, instead of doing a full CG, let's do what they did with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, where we have a highly stylized version of 2D animation brought to the third dimensional plane.
That's a good idea.
All right, but what about you? What would be your perfect live-action adaptation?
I think, again, so from animated to live action, I think Pocahontas would be a prime candidate for a live action film because 80% of the cast members are human. And because Disney is on this binge of live action remakes, why not remake Pocahontas?
Because it's politically incorrect.
But it could encompass a very positive message, and it could spark some controversy, which we do need in film.
All right. I want to cut into your answer. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
But do you know what would happen if they adapted Pocahontas? So, as we saw with Beauty and the Beast, and we saw with previous live-action adaptations, they are deeply concerned about answering plot holes with their movies, or fixing historical inaccuracies with their movies, right? Now, Pocahontas was 13 at the time, not 22.
Oh, God. I see what you're saying. Oh, boy. Ooh.
We've got a few inaccuracies to fix with Pocahontas if we're on the same binge as usual for Disney's live action.
Well, if we're going... Okay. This is true, because Pocahontas was not mythological in any sense. She was not fiction. She was fictitious. Gosh. And looking back on it, Pocahontas may not be the best start, but... I'm kind of excited for the Mulan movie, where, again, 90% of the cast members are human, save for maybe one animated dragon, but if you did that well enough. Again, there's so many different movies Disney could draw influence on. Maybe Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, or better yet, Sleeping Beauty. Oh, wait, they had Maleficent. But even that
They made Maleficent. It did decently well.
It did decently well.
All right. I came up with a slightly different answer, because you know what the perfect live-action movie would be?
What?
The Pokemon movie.
Oh my God! Actually, that's a good point. That is one thing both Nick and I are excited about. Detective Pikachu, played by Ryan Reynolds.
We're shills.
This is actually kind of the original question we asked. What live-action movie would you like to see? And Pokemon, right?
Pokemon.
To see something you cherished as a kid seen in person. Ooh, that sounds amazing.
And as a gritty detective movie on a dirty street with all these Pokemon themed shops and answering all the questions of what if Pokemon were in the real world, how would we adapt to that? Oh my God, that sounds wonderful.
It does. So some live action movies sound like a good idea if done right.
But there's a lot of bad ideas.
There are a lot of bad ideas, which is why you do have to kind of exercise tact to kind of pull a live action movie off. Like, I recommended Pocahontas, and clearly that may not have been the best course of action there. Anyway.
All right, well, I think that the overall lesson to get for our own perspectives is, as long as you have a script where it can survive the transition to CGI, go for it. But if you can't survive the transition to CGI, then go for something like Into the Spider-Verse, where you go for a highly stylized 2D on a 3D plane instead.
That's true. Give it a little animation reboot.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for this unique perspective of sorts on the animation apocalypse. Feel free to join us next week when we talk about Shazam.